Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today that's really hopefully going to give you some information about good sleep tips for school-age children during this trying time, specifically with the restart of school with the COVID-19 pandemic ongoing. We thought one of the best ways to get started was really to introduce who we are. For those of you who don't know us, my name is Dr. Amanda Hassinger. I'm a pediatrician as well as a pediatric intensive care doctor who is trained in sleep medicine as well. I work primarily in Oshai Children's Hospital as well as in the UBMD Pediatric Sleep Center with Dr. Monegro.
Pleasure. Welcome to this webinar. And as Dr. Hassinger and I, we hope that you'll benefit from it as we get our kids ready for school. I am trained in pulmonary and critical care and sleep medicine. And I do work at Buffalo General and Oshai, among other places. This picture here is one of our favorite pictures because it commemorates the opening of our UBMD Pediatric Sleep Center back in July of 2020. And this is Leroy, a very sweet patient of ours who we had seen in the clinic as well. And to this day, thankfully, has had no sleep issues. So very happy to say that. Now, our UBMD Pediatric Sleep Center is the only pediatric dedicated sleep center in Western New York. We opened it back in July of last year, and we are now an accredited lab by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. We see children with many sleep disorders. Many of them can present with various symptoms as listed here, such as bedtime refusal, sleepiness, bedwetting, snoring, problems staying asleep, walking or talking in sleep, nightmares, restless sleep, insomnia, and daytime hyperactivity. These are just a few symptoms to mention. And in today's webinar, our objectives are to highlight the importance of sleep in children. We also want to share our information from our research about how COVID has changed children's sleep. And we want to end the talk by discussing sleep tips for back to school. Dr. Hassinger and I do not have any conflicts of interest to report. Please make sure that you're all muted, which I think you are during this webinar. And feel free to enter any questions in the chat. There will be a Q&A at the end of our webinar.
Okay, so now that that's all out of the way, let's talk about sleep and sleep in children and why it's so important. If you think about it, children and babies especially sleep for more than half of their lives. Newborns sleep for 2/3 of their day when they sleep for 16 hours out of 24. And that's because sleep is so essential for their bodies to develop and to grow. And that's actually what we talk about as pediatricians as the main job of babies, is to grow and develop. And so when they're sleeping, they are able to do that by slowing down their metabolism. So their heart, their blood vessels, and their muscles can all rest while their body secretes hormones or signals throughout the system to tell your bones and your muscles and your cells to grow. While at the same time, the brain is taking all the energy it can to form new neural connections, clean up all the memories that happened during the day, store them in that long-term memory bank, and then reset itself for the next day. And these are all very complex pathways that are happening while children and adults are sleeping, but more so for children since they learn and are growing every day. And what we've found in about 2 decades now of more aggressive interest in what sleep does to our body, that there's no single part of our body that is unaffected by how we sleep. These are 2 issues of National Geographic magazine that were dedicated specifically just to the concept of sleep and what we're learning about it in our research. And so this is actually probably more important in children than in adults, but it's become very apparent to us that it's not hard to believe that sleep's important if it only takes a few days of not sleeping to actually die from that. That's how important sleep is to our daily function and our daily bodies. And what we see in our clinics, and what you probably see in some of your children if they're not good sleepers, is that there is a global impact on that child from a poor night's sleep. And that's because it actually causes systemic and or body, all the systems effects on inflammation and nightly stress. It's actually a stress response to have a night of bad sleep. That leads to excess appetite and overeating and obesity, even in 1 and 2 and 3-year-old children. It affects their immune system. It actually lowers their defenses against certain illnesses or viruses that they may see, as well as, unfortunately, affects their ability to respond to a vaccine. So children who are poor sleepers are actually incompletely protected by a vaccine. It can lead to daytime issues with focus and learning. We see this in classrooms all the time. And if it lasts for years, can end up causing things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or just basic hyperactivity. And any parent in the room knows when you're tired, when your child is tired, they are hyperactive. They're going bananas throughout that room. And that's sort of what happens over years of poor sleep. And if you remember back to the newborn days when you were taking care of your babies yourselves, a bad night's sleep can cause irritability. And in children, that would be bad temper tantrums, aggression at bedtime, especially when they're tired. They may act out against a sibling or against you, or even hurt themselves when they're overtired. And down the road, within a few years in school age and adolescence, that actually impairs their decision making, their higher executive thinking, their long-term memory, and can cause long-term depression and anxiety. And one of the scariest things I've ever heard as a parent and a sleep doctor is that there's a direct link between not enough sleep in teenagers and attempting suicide. There's actually children, teenagers that don't sleep well have a 3-fold higher odds or 3 times the chance of actually trying to kill themselves related to their poor sleep. And so this is something that is very important to talk about and be more aware of, especially in the context of the anxiety and the stress of the pandemic that we're all experiencing now. But I want you to rethink about sleep health as not just the amount of time that you sleep. It's not the amount of hours. If you put in 7 hours, you're a good sleeper and that's it. It's actually more multidimensional than that. There are many aspects to the way that we sleep that tell us if we're healthy sleepers or unhealthy sleepers. And this is a very helpful sleep health score that we use in sleep medicine, but in also some of the epidemiologic studies that gives you an idea of all the different aspects of sleep that have been proven to be important to being a good sleeper. And you can see the bottom, the duration one, is the only one that talks about how many hours you sleep. The rest talk about how often you go to bed at the same time or wake up at the same time, if you wake up feeling refreshed and ready for the day, and you have enough energy to stay awake throughout the day without falling asleep. It's also very important that you sleep during crucial nighttime hours, that 2 and 4 a.m. period, when your body, your internal clock, has turned down your body temperature, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your metabolism. It's very important that you're sleeping during that period of time. And then, of course, how efficient you are at sleeping. And we talk about sleep efficiency as sort of a concept of insomnia. So if you spend a lot of time in bed where you can't sleep, you can't fall asleep, or if you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't stay asleep, then you're an inefficient sleeper. And that's a sign of poor sleep in general.
As mentioned, sleep health is more than just the amount of sleep that you obtain. That being said, it's worth reviewing what are the recommended amounts of sleep for children by age. And if you look at the school-age children 6 to 12 years of age, I want to point out that the recommended hours of sleep in a 24-hour period is 9 to 12 hours. And they should not be napping around this age group. When you look at teenagers, adolescents around, the group of 13 to 18, it's worth noting that this is a period of their lives where there's significant changes in their sleep habit. So they tend to want to sleep less, sleep later, and tend to be more active in the evening time. That being said, they still need 8 to 10 hours of sleep, and they should not be napping during the day. And daytime naps might be a signal to you as parents or providers that maybe there's something else going on at night. Now, when you look at the data as to how kids are sleeping in the US, and look at the CDC data from youth risk behavior surveys, we're overall not doing a very good job. 6 out of 10 middle schoolers don't get enough sleep, and 7 out of 10 high schoolers don't get enough sleep. Um, and so uh, it's understandable that sleep is more than just the amount of sleep, but uh, it's also telling that they're not even achieving the hours that are recommended for them. Let's step back for a moment and review a bit of what normal sleep looks like. I want to point out that everyone has a biological clock, otherwise known as the circadian rhythm. Circadian is a word that comes from the Latin circadium, which stands for around a day, about a day. And so we all have a rhythm that functions within a 24-hour or so period. So much so that if you were to go and live in a cave for a week, you would go to sleep and wake up around the same time. Many of you maybe have had an experience where you forget to turn on your alarm clock and you still manage to wake up around the same time. So that is your internal clock at play. And all life forms have this internal biological clock, from bacteria to mice to humans. In fact, every cell in your body actually has a rhythm. And this has been studied where you look at different cells, such as even from the liver, for instance, and they express proteins in a rhythm, more so at one time and less so at another time. And this internal clock really regulates all the functions of your day. How awake and alert you are in a 24-hour period. If you were to look at this diagram here to the right, you can see that typically you would be most awake and alert around 10 and have better coordination around 2:30 and faster reaction time around 3:30. Your body temperature also functions in a rhythm. So your core body temperature tends to drop around 4:35 a.m. and tends to be the highest around evening time. Your food consumption is very much related to sleep. So if you were uh, you don't want to be hungry at bedtime, and so you tend not to be hungry at bedtime. And if you are sleep deprived, you also ironically will end up eating more because the hormones that regulate appetite and fullness can be disrupted when you are sleep deprived. Food and alertness are tied very much closely together. If you are starving, you're more likely to stay awake. Um, your blood pressure also functions in a rhythm. So it tends to drop at bedtime and sleep and then rise up to the highest around evening time. All the hormone productions function in a rhythm as well. For instance, the stress hormone cortisol would tend to be higher in the evening time. And would be reduced in the evening time and higher when you wake up. Now, if you are sleep deprived, for instance, then all that changes. Then your cortisol level can be higher around evening time when it shouldn't be. The growth hormone that is so important for our children is mainly released also at bedtime. And so when there is not enough sleep, you also are not able to release enough growth hormone. Other hormones as well function in a rhythm too. Your thyroid stimulating hormone also functions in a rhythm. Your metabolism is affected also by your internal clock, so that your sugar levels should be lower sort of in the earlier part of the night. When you are sleep deprived, in fact, you have difficulty regulating your blood sugar. And in fact, you may be at higher risk of diabetes. So your internal clock really functions and affects all your daily activities. And we are all creatures of routine. Now, there are things and factors, cues really, that we call Zeitgebers. It's German for time givers. These are cues that mainly come from our environment that affect this internal clock that we have. So they can move that clock forward, move that clock back in this circadian rhythm, which is a little bit longer than 24 hours. The main factor, and I want to stress this, that affects this internal clock of when you go to bed is light. And by light, I mean not just sunlight, but light from a light bulb, from a lamp, from any electronic devices. So hence screen time is going to be so important. I like to joke around with some of our patients, our kids, that unless you come from another planet, you will be affected by light. So, you know, I've heard it said many times, oh, I can't go to sleep unless I have the TV on in my room. Well, you are from planet Earth and light affects you. Now, there's nothing wrong in it of itself with television or tablets or cell phone, but it's the light that really affects this internal clock. In particular, the blue light. And you may even find now in some devices that you can have this blue light filter that can help facilitate sleep and not affect this clock as much. Temperature also affects this internal clock. So if it's very hot, it can make it very difficult to fall asleep. Remember, your body temperature starts to drop during sleep, and it's the lowest right before you wake up. Exercise affects this internal clock as well. If you were to be running strenuously right before bedtime, your heart rate will go up, blood pressure will go up. It would be very difficult for you to go to sleep right away. We've seen children that have been involved in many extracurricular activities, and they sometimes can come home late on 7 o'clock, sometimes 8 o'clock, right after uh, being involved in strenuous exercise. And those kids, understandably, have a hard time going to bed around 8 o'clock when they just came back from some game. So be mindful of that. Food and drink will also affect the clock. So if you're drinking juice or soda, then that may be an issue. Um, Depending on your culture, you may have grown up with drinking certain drinks at bedtime. In older groups, teenagers, sometimes they may drink coffee too late in the evening. And so that will affect their ability to go to sleep. Social interactions also affect this clock. So if you are on the phone, if you're having a conversation, if you're texting for teenagers that may have a cell phone, that sends your brain signals that, hey, it's not time to fall asleep. Now, when you go to sleep is a factor of not just the circadian rhythm, which we talked about and depicted here as process C, but also a factor of your sleep pressure, your homeostatic control. Now, no one goes to sleep by flipping a light switch. So it's, you know, oftentimes we tell our kids, hey, you know, go to sleep. What we're really saying is we want you to go to bed, because no one can really tell themselves, I will sleep right now. It doesn't happen. You can't force yourself to go to sleep. And it's because it's a factor of these two things. And so if you were to look at this diagram, if you look at process C, the alerting signal that comes from your circadian rhythm, the intensity rises throughout the day. And right before bedtime, in this case depicted here a little after 9, there's a drop in that signaling. The sleep pressure is that pressure that we build during the day. And if you look at process C, as the sleep pressure builds more and more and more during the day, it will reach a point of intensity right when your circadian rhythm is sending a less signal to be awake. And so when you have that sleep pressure and less alertness, you fall asleep naturally. And yes, that's the main thing about this diagram that is worth mentioning.
So let's get to some of the things that we want to talk about for our children in Western New York. Both Dr. Monegro and I are parents to school-aged children, and we really started to notice that when the schools closed in March 2020, there was a lot of things changing in our children's lives that affected everything about their day-to-day. They didn't have to get up in the morning to take their bus or walk to school. We didn't necessarily have to get out of bed to get to a certain clinic or see a certain person right away. They had really online education that could happen at any time, and they had less physical activity. It wasn't just the loss of gym class, it was also the fact that they didn't have to walk from the school building to the cafeteria and back. They were in their house, which is much smaller than the physical space of being at school every day. And then you add in the anxiety and the stress that we were all feeling at that time, and we really started to wonder, how was that impacting how our children slept? And did that matter in how they were coping with this process? So we set out to answer that question with a survey. We sent a survey to parents all over Western New York that had children in that 5 to 13-year age group. We were hoping really for elementary school and middle school, since teenagers are so different in the way they sleep in their school in general. And we did want all types of children. We wanted public schools, private schools, homeschooled children to see the differences by how their education was being delivered. And we sent out the survey right in the height of the holiday season. So kids have been back at school in fall 2020 for at least 3 months. So we could see if they had established a routine to see what their sleep patterns were like. And what we asked the parents to tell us was, what's your house like? How many people live there? I mean, how many parents are there? Kind of what is basic stuff. And then what kind of school was your child in before the pandemic started? Screen time, sleep patterns, sleep behaviors, those kinds of things. And then we asked similar things for during that lockdown period when the schools were closed and everybody was stuck in the house. And then now that school had restarted, how has that all changed? And we were very lucky to have over 100 parents respond to the survey, with a little over half of the children being described as boys, with an average age of 8.5 years. And the breakdown, this is just a pie chart that's showing you the percentage of each child in each type of school. So you can see the largest group of children were private school, and about 1 in 3 were public school, and then the rest were either homeschooled, or there was a small group of children that had been not in school yet when the pandemic hit, and the fall 2020 semester was actually their kindergarten year. And what was interesting was that, not surprisingly, children actually slept more when schools were closed by about a half an hour on average, 25 minutes. And that's what this bar chart is showing you. In the dark blue, they slept an average of 10.3 hours per day before the pandemic hit. Then when we were in lockdown and the schools were closed, they were sleeping an average of 10.8 hours. And then when school restarted, that dropped again. But interestingly, it didn't go back to the pre-pandemic levels. They were still sleeping more. And that's probably because of some of them being in virtual learning or hybrid systems. So they were able to get more sleep on certain weekdays than they did before the pandemic started. And that is seen when you look at the average times that they woke up and the average time that they went to bed. There was really not a return to the pre-pandemic wake up time of 6:45 when the schools restarted in fall of 2020. So kids slept in until 8 o'clock during lockdown. Woohoo, party time, no school, right? And then when fall hit again, they actually woke up later by 20 minutes than they used to before the pandemic had hit. So I think that was the impact of the hybrid learning or the virtual learning for some of those children. Bedtime also didn't go back to the way it was before. Before the pandemic, on average, the normal bedtime was about 8:30 on a weekday. That was pushed back to a little bit after 9 during lockdown. And when schools restarted, it didn't go back to 8:30. It went to 8:52. So only a few minutes before what was happening when the schools were closed and everybody was home. We also asked parents what they thought about the quality of their child's sleep. Now, this is a busy chart, so I apologize. There's a lot to look at here, but I can just orient you to each cluster of bars is actually telling you a specific type of sleep pattern that the parents were asked. So did your child go to bed at the same time every night? Was your child able to sleep alone, or did they ask to sleep with you? Was your child having a lot of nightmares or refusing to go to bed or tired or hyperactive during the day? That's what each cluster is sort of representing. And the dark blue is, again, before the pandemic, how often was this happening? And the higher number means the better you are. So you can see almost every single dark blue bar for before the pandemic, kids were doing well. 80 to 90% of kids had good sleep patterns. But when they dipped into that turquoise range or the lockdown phase, every part of their sleep got worse. Even getting enough sleep. Parents thought that children were not getting enough sleep during lockdown, even though I just showed you they were sleeping a half an hour more per night. And probably that's because the quality of sleep they were getting was not as good, because they were struggling to go to bed, they were sleeping at different times, highly variable every day, and they weren't really having enough energy to get through their day. And if you can see on the leftmost cluster of bars, I put a sort of Y with arrows to show you that, again, just like their total sleep time, children didn't go back to the way they were before the pandemic when the fall school year started. All of those orange bars represent how they were sleeping in the fall of 2020, and none of them went back to their pre-pandemic baseline. So they're not doing as well. They're not sleeping as well or as independent or having as few nightmares as they were before this all started. And probably this could be related to screen time. And for those of you who don't know what screen time is, that's kind of amazing, but just for a quick definition, it's exposure to anything that has a backlit screen. So just like Dr. Monegro was mentioning, TVs, video games, tablets, readers, smartphones, any of those things are considered screens. Even if they're on in the background of a room, that's a screen exposure to a child. So before I tell you this information, I just want to make sure you realize that the majority of the children in our survey were actually in a hybrid learning model or an all virtual school model in the fall of 2020. And hybrid means only a few days in person or a few days home, and it was variable how many of each. But that makes sense what I'm about to tell you, because most of their education was through online platforms, right? So before the pandemic started, only 6% of kids in this survey were looking at a screen for 4 hours or more per day. When lockdown hit, when everybody was home, schools were closed, we were all on our computers doing work and Zooms and meetings and classes, 2/3 of kids were looking at a screen for at least 4 hours or more per day. And for all of you on this Zoom or webinar who have been working from home or struggling with taking care of kids at home, this isn't surprising to any of you. I mean, we've all been trying to get by showing them a screen, or that's where they're doing their classes, or that's how we've survived. But even in the fall of 2020, that number didn't go back to 6%. It stayed at 40%. And to put that 4 hours in context, on the right, I've showed you a graph of the recommended amount of screen time for children according to the American Academy of Pediatrics for the most recent guidelines, which came out in 2019, and how much screen time children should be exposed to by age. Toddlers should get none. Preschoolers should get up to 1 hour, but no more than that. And that 6 to 10 age group should only get 1 or 1.5 hours per day. And the early prepubescents should be closer to 2 hours per day. So 4 hours or more per day is double the amount of screen time that even the older kids in this cohort should be getting. Not surprisingly, homeschoolers were protected from this. It was really the children that were in public or private school that had to go and increase their screen time. And unfortunately, those that were in that hybrid learning or the all virtual learning had the most amount of screen time. Again, not surprising, but it also equated to worse sleep. And all of those questions I just showed you about nightmares and co-sleeping and all that kind of stuff, the children that had the most screen time had the worst sleep patterns overall. And so the bottom line that we take away from this data is that more screen time for our children does cause worse sleep overall. Even though they were sleeping more, their sleep quality was affected by that part of being in a pandemic and learning in a pandemic.
So what are some other implications for the school year? So what we've learned from this study is that children's sleep habits are affected by sudden changes in routines. just the mere fact that their whole school schedule was uprooted, and there was the lockdown, and then school had to restart again, and all these happened very quickly. Uh, it did translate to worse sleep health. And what's interesting in our survey is that healthy sleep wasn't related to just total hours of sleep, because the kids in the lockdown slept longer. Yet parents still noted that they had more struggling to sleep, and that more other sleep symptoms, maybe not enough sleep. So routine is really important. And as we mentioned, biologically, we thrive, and our whole physiology thrives in routine. We want to eat same time, we want to exercise around the same time, want to wake up same time, go to bed around the same time. And when we don't, then we have all the hormonal balance is thrown off. So whether you're homeschooled or hybrid or in school, our challenge is to give our children a consistent daily structure. And we don't know what will happen this coming year. Anything is possible at this point, right? None of us expected this pandemic to really shut the whole world down, so to speak. And so whatever happens in terms of the schooling, we have to have the structure in place so that whether they're at home or hybrid, their day feels as similar as it can be to in school, for instance. Other implications, and have to do really with this point in time that we're in right now, the prior to school time period. This is a very crucial moment for your kids. The time prior to the start of school is the time that we need to use to ensure a smooth transition into school. Because remember, you can't turn on and off the switch that tells you when it's bedtime in a day. In fact, all those cues, all those Zeitgebers that we talked about that affect that internal clock, affect it over weeks and weeks and weeks. And before you know it, if your child was staying up late in the summer playing video games, and he stayed up late at 1, and then by second week 2 a.m., third week 3 a.m., 4, 5 a.m., and then you have a child who's up till 5 in the morning wanting to go to school at 7, they're going to have a hard time because they're going to be falling asleep during the day. And so this time is crucial. So how do we do that? Well, part of it has to do with, as Dr. Hassinger was saying, is being mindful of screen time and being mindful of the bedtime routines to help improve that sleep quality. Pulling all-nighters, playing games during the summer every day, it's going to be hurtful when school time comes.
So we thought that we would give you age-appropriate back-to-school sleep tips, because it's not the same for our 13-year-olds as it is for our 6 to 12-year-olds. And that's based on the data that we know about the changes that happen around puberty. So if you have a patient or a child that is already going through puberty in that 10, 11, 12 range, then think of them closer to teenagers than the 6 or 7-year-olds when you're thinking about our tips. But it's very important that you focus on age-appropriate bedtimes and age-appropriate wake-up times. I know that during the pandemic, it's been easy and actually sort of crucial in the survival tactic to go to bed at the same time for all of your schedules. But unfortunately, a 6-year-old doesn't have the same biological clock as a 40-year-old. And so a 6-year-old shouldn't go to bed at the same time as you do. And so it's important to keep an eye on their schedule so that they're going to bed when their circadian rhythm is telling them it is bedtime. And that's usually closer to 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night. That's a normal bedtime for his internal cellular clock. Even if you're a night owl, even if your whole family's been a night owl, a 6-year-old still has a circadian rhythm that tells them that 9 o'clock is too late for them to go to bed. And then you really need to set your wake time that works for your family. So if you all have to get up at 5 o'clock to get ready to get on the bus to get in the commute, then what you do is you count back from that wake time that's necessary for getting to work and do what you have to do, and count back 9 to 12 hours so you hit that goal total sleep time that your child needs to function. If it's hard to wake them up in the morning, if they're groggy, then they may need to go to bed a little bit early. That goal range is based on each person's individual sleep cycle. So it's not like all 6-year-olds need exactly 9 hours. One 6-year-old may need 8 hours and 45 minutes. Another one may need 9 hours and 15 minutes. And the best way to know that is if they wake up refreshed and they just said they had a dream. You should wake up after a dream. All of us should emerge after a REM cycle. That's the end of our sleep cycle. If you wake up groggy or confused, you haven't finished that sleep cycle and you need a little bit more sleep. So keep an eye on and follow their cues as you wake them up if they're in that goal sleep range, so you can figure out that sweet spot for their bedtime. Now, if you have a child like this who gives you this face when you try to wake them up at 5:30 or 6 o'clock to go to school, use sunlight and physical activity to get them going. Get them out of the room. It's like that old movies where they open up the curtains and the sun blares in. I think that's even in Back to the Future or something that we've all seen, right? It's actually physically based in the circadian rhythm. And so you need to reset that so they have that anchor wake time that pulls their bedtime to where it needs to be. Unfortunately, and this is the worst news I ever heard when I did my sleep medicine fellowship, we have to fall asleep at the same time and wake up at the same time on weekends and weekdays. There's no 5-day cycle built into our 5-day work week built into our circadian rhythm. It's not there. So our body doesn't know the difference between Tuesday and Saturday. So we really need to have a very consistent sleep cycle between Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and through Sunday. And then that age-old adage that all dads have, probably you did this too, Dr. Monegro, until you learned otherwise. It's not good to let your kid get their last burst of energy out right before bed. Don't let them run around the block right before you try to put them to sleep. Just like that teenager in sports practice that raises their heart rate, that raises their blood pressure, it doesn't get their energy out, it actually revives it. So it makes it harder for them to fall asleep when you tell them to go lay down in bed. And there is no need for an evening snack in a 6 to 12-year-old. There is no need for extra food right before bed. They should eat everything during the day. They should not be hungry after dinner. So don't give them anything extra to eat. And lastly, the one tip that's going to be obvious is screens. Avoid or remove screens from the bedroom as much as you can. If you have a TV in their room, unplug it. Take away the video games. They don't need a cell phone at night. I tell all my patients, TikTok will be there in the morning. Don't worry, you won't miss any videos. You can gram as soon as you wake up. That kind of stuff is all there for you waiting. And then I actually have these kinds of faces from the children I see in my clinic. There's paper books. Read them a book on paper. You don't have to use a computer to read a book, and actually have limits to when they can use their screen time and give them a reward if they can meet those limits. I think that's very important in this age group where positive reinforcement is so successful in getting them to follow that command.
Now, when it comes to your teenagers, enforcing, limitations on screen time, the strategy will have to be different. I think there has to be a dialogue with your teenagers. They're old enough to understand, and you want their input. So you'll have more success in negotiating with your teenager than going and barging into the room and snatching the TV away and the tablet and the phone. You'll just end up having a rebellious child. But if you have that conversation, and have them sort of set goals for themselves, because ultimately that's what you want. Once they, if they leave the home, you want them to be able to be responsible adults that can set limits for themselves. And if they understand that it's to their benefit, then they can have buy-in to limiting screen time. And so you could even have a media curfew and avoid the TV, cell phones. If they have a phone in their rooms, have them charge it further from their bed, so it's not a immediate reflex to grab the phone. Tablets can be an issue, computer screens, video games, blue LED lights in particular. I had one teenager, loved LED lights. And I asked, well, what color do you have? Blue. Of all the colors, please, not blue. And the child said blue. So basically, uh, uh, she eliminated that color and slept much better thereafter. So it's amazing what small changes can do in affecting their sleep habits. Children that parents come and say, look, they can't fall asleep without their phone. And lo and behold, the phone is gone and they fall asleep and sleep well. It's really remarkable. And you see those results not in a month. You see those results in days because we are affected so much by light. Use bed only for sleeping, not to read or eat. Sometimes teenagers can hang out in their rooms and they'll spend all day in their rooms on bed, and there is no clear association between bed and sleep. So when they go to bed, in their mind, they're thinking, oh, it's time to have fun, time to send a text. So I think making that association is important. I had one adolescent who just made a little bit more separation between his fun space and the bed sleeping area. And it was difficult for him to do, but it made a big impact in his sleep hygiene.
And Dr. Monegro, that's definitely an issue that's been worsened by the pandemic, since so many children had
Yes.
nowhere to go to learn and they were stuck in
Oh,
their rooms.
my
So
goodness,
even just a
clearly.
chair next to their bed is a nice strategy to help them get out of their bed.
Definitely, definitely. We were finding that kids were on their computer, in class, in their bedroom, all day,
All day. Hmm.
all day, literally. And what they would just come out to eat and go back in their rooms. And it completely threw their whole sleep schedule out of whack. Um, and sometimes kids will hang out in their room. Teenagers will come from school, they hang out in the room, and they're laying in bed, and long behold, they take a nap. And then that becomes a problem because, as we mentioned, that sleep pressure builds up throughout the day. The moment you take a nap, you've lost that sleep pressure. Now there is no drive to go to sleep at your normal bedtime. You're just not going to be sleeping, and you can't force yourself to fall asleep. So being mindful of that. Also, it's good that they engage in activities right before bedtime that they find relaxing, whether it's breathing exercises, listening to soothing music, any meditation, any prayer, anything that they find exciting. There's so much relaxing. There's so much stress in their lives, homework and stress from social media that it's important to plug out and to just relax. And if they do have a hard time falling asleep, it's okay to leave the bedroom. It doesn't make sense to just lay in bed and look at the ceiling and wonder and worry about why I can't go to sleep. Well, you can't force yourself to go to sleep. Whatever habits you've had that were bad the weeks prior, you can't fix all that in a day. And so sometimes it's good to just leave that area, leave that bedroom, and do something calming around dim lights. And sometimes I just say, find something boring. They like to read, anything that you find boring to read. So how to transition back to school, as we pointed out, take this time now to adjust and resynchronize their internal clock. You can adjust their bedtime little by little. It doesn't have to be all at once. You can say, okay, if you eventually want them to go to bed by 8 o'clock, and right now they're going to bed at 11, every couple of days adjust the bedtime. So instead of 11, it'll be 10:30, and then 10:30 you'll be 10, and then eventually you'll reach your goal bedtime by the time school starts. And this can happen over the course of 2 weeks. Obviously, if the sleep habit is very bad, and they're going to sleep every day at 5 in the morning, well, then you need all the time you can get to bring that clock back so that they naturally want to fall asleep when they should. Set goals for screen time. That's going to be very important. And for teenagers, set that goal as a partnership. How long will it take to transition? As we mentioned, It could be 1 or 2 weeks if it's a small adjustment, but if it's a major adjustment, it can be months, to be honest.
So why? Why should you try to do this now? It really will help with that transition in the first few weeks of school. You'll see improved school performance. You'll see right away better focus and attention span than they would have had if you don't do this now. And that morning time, which can be so stressful and so difficult because you have to wake them up 8 times, hopping around looking for a sock, they can't find their backpack. That's going to get easier because it'll be easier for them to wake up, be refreshed, and move on with the day. And then it'll result in less irritability and mood swings in your child. And as Dr. Monegro already alluded to, you'll have less of a chance to have that afternoon slump, especially that first month of school when kids come home and they just lay on the couch after their snack and they fall asleep accidentally. If they have that afternoon nap, they're going to have trouble falling asleep at night. So if you give them more energy to make it through the day, they're going to do better at bedtime. And what that means to all of you is that you and your entire family will sleep better. It'll be easier mornings, easier nights, and that routine will pay dividends for all of you if you start working on that now. And I think that's the one thing that's been so striking for me as a pediatrician to see in the sleep world. You make one person sleep better in that family, that child sleep better, that entire family is impacted. And it's so wonderful to see parents being happier, more productive, and these siblings sleeping better. And that's what you can give your child and your family now. So with that, I think we went over a few minutes. I apologize, but we really got through all of the didactic part of it, all the slides that we wanted to discuss directly. And I think we have at least about 12 minutes left over for your questions for us and for our panel. So
There's a couple of questions here.
Yeah.
One of my patients just sent me a hello. Well, good to see you, Mr. Noman. Pleasure. I'll be giving you a call later.
All right, I've got one. Is there research and or help for a baby with restless leg syndrome? Absolutely. That is one of the things that we manage on a regular basis, and we are finding out more and more children have both rhythmic movement, myoclonic movements, and restless leg earlier in life, and we help manage the diagnosis and the medication for that. So that is something that our center can do. And if you just email that email that's on your screen right now with the patient information, we can help with that as soon as possible.
Is there circadian rhythm coordinated with sun up, sun down? So yes, when you want bright lights, you want sunlight in the morning, and that will sort of synchronize your biological clock to a normal 24-hour day period. So sun up, sun down are important. Now, when the sun goes down, the brain needs to know that it's dark outside. And so when you have too many bright lights in the home, it interferes with that signaling. But yes, having bright lights in the morning is going to be a huge help. In fact, having bright lights in the morning when you wake up naturally is going to help bring your bedtime a little bit earlier, if you can believe it. So having that bright light will help you in the morning when you wake up, will help you sleep earlier.
And there's a question here about blue light glasses. They have variable efficacy. There was a study that just came out that showed that they actually don't provide as much protection as the companies that are manufacturing them are touting. So I would be, it's hard for us to recommend using them. Ideally, you would just try to get the screens out of bedtime if possible. I don't think that they protect you as much as they should. And the key is to have a small amount of your visual field, so as of your line of sight, a small amount as possible affected by that light. So a TV across the room is better than a tablet in front of your child's face because it's less of that exposure to their retina, which is what's the signal center in the back of your eye that tells your brain that it's time to be awake.
Yes, it's okay to have night lights, especially with children with anxiety or fears. There's nothing wrong with night lights. But there's all kinds of devices out there. The main point is, as Dr. Hassinger said, is not to make the room bright. It should be dim. It should not be a bright night light. So if it's small projections or a dim night light that you plug in, those should be fine. Not in the
And so
direct
should
line of sight.
the alarm clocks with the blue digits also wouldn't be enough to cause that much of an ambient blue light, so that should be fine as well. Um, There's a question here about when your child goes to bed, I turn on classical music on the TV. Classical music is the best music to choose, so that's actually a nice background music. And so it shouldn't be a big issue in terms of the light that that TV would emit for that period of time. Ideally, you would put it on like an Alexa or something that doesn't have any light to it, but that shouldn't be much of an issue for bedtime either.
In your opinion, should a parent get rid of alarm clocks with blue light digits? Every device is different, but from what I have gathered, the amount of light from those digits is minimal. So I wouldn't see that as a problem. It's more when you have these around the room LED lights that are right in the ceiling projecting down that becomes a problem. That being said, anything you can do to minimize light, and so long as it's not doesn't provoke anxiety in the child, should be fine. And we all have all kinds of devices. You don't have to necessarily remove the entire device. You can just cover up whatever light source is an issue.
Okay, so let's keep moving. We got a lot of questions here. Is there an effective way to recover from missed sleep? Try to go to bed at the same time the next night. If you have one bad night, you don't need to nap. The best thing to do would be to get back on your schedule the night following, and then that'll correct itself within a day or two. Sleeping in is not the best way to do it. If you sleep in, that'll affect the next bed night and the next one after that. So the best way to do it is just to try to get back on your schedule as soon as possible.
Particularly teenagers,
Mhm.
you could have the best sleep throughout the weekday, and then the weekend comes, and every week they'll stay up till 5 in the morning, sleep in the next day. They're off schedule, and that's very harmful for them.
Next question is, Dr. Monegro, how does COVID infection affect the sleep of children? What do you think?
Well, when you say COVID infection, it's more than just having COVID. You could have COVID in the nares, you could have COVID in the lungs, you could have COVID and be completely asymptomatic. You may not necessarily, most children do not end up hospitalized with COVID, although we are certainly seeing a rise across the US because they are a vulnerable population. As far as how any level of COVID infection will affect children, we still studying that. Certainly the pandemic, that caused a lockdown of schools, that was very disruptive. And as our research shows, it created a lot of sleep disturbances in children. So it wasn't a direct effect of COVID itself, but an indirect effect.
Okay, next question. How would you recommend helping children with sleepwalking and nightmares? So it actually depends on what is the trigger for those things, and that would be something that we could work out in our sleep clinic. There's actually a lot of reasons that children have what we call parasomnias or sleep-related behaviors, and some of them are correctable and avoidable. So it's something that we would be happy to talk about in clinic to try to get down to the problem of at hand. We did see a lot of children having more nightmares, and there's another question here about anxiety because of the pandemic and during the pandemic. As a parent and pediatrician, I know that children pick up on our anxieties and our body language and everything that's happening around them. So even if a child doesn't say they're worried, internally they do have some anxiety about what's been happening to them and to us. And the best way to deal with anxiety is really work on communicating with them, giving them words to explain what they're feeling, explain to them that you are feeling the same thing, and then find out at bedtime what is making them scared. Is it just because they get comfort because you're near them and it's a separation anxiety thing and they want to sleep with you to feel safe? That is very normal. And that's a very appropriate response for a child going through an anxiety or a stress. But you have to give them coping skills to be able to soothe on their own. They've actually shown children who are able to self-soothe have more success as young adults and grown-ups because it's a life skill that they have to work on now. And this is a great opportunity to work on that. Because I can tell you as an adult going through this too, you don't want to wake up with 5 kids in your bed every morning. You need your rest as well. So it's a healthy thing for you to sleep on your own and your child to sleep by themselves. So Dr. Monegro alluded to some breathing exercises. There's a lot of mindfulness apps out there that are extremely helpful. Even just yoga breaths really make a difference in children, and they help you as well. And sometimes being in the room so that they can feel comfortable until they fall asleep is a good thing. But really letting them fall asleep on their own in their own bed is the best way to help them soothe themselves to sleep.
There's many exercises. There's tapping exercises where you can just start going and tapping around the face and the shoulder and the elbows. It depends on the age of the child and the level of anxiety and the circumstances surrounding that. Older teenagers, they sometimes find journaling to be very relaxing, particularly if they have so much on their minds that they just need to offload all their thoughts onto paper so that they can relax and rest at night. That has been successful as well.
Yeah, I call that a worry log, and I tell them to do that a few hours before bedtime so that it doesn't rev up their anxiety right at bedtime. And then some kids actually do really well when they rip out their anxiety, whatever they're worried about, and crumple up that paper and they throw it away. So sometimes that can be effective as well. It just depends on your child, and you really have to try to troubleshoot it and figure out what works best for them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple questions about screen time I think we can answer at the same time. Is all screen time equally bad? No. Definitely big differences in terms of engagement. So you mentioned video calls with the family. Do they have the same impact that watching TV does? No. In fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics is very clear that if you're doing screen time that allows a child to interact, socially interact, and learn things. So if you're watching a PBS Kids show with your child, instead of just plopping them in front of it while you make dinner, that's actually not unhealthy screen time. So it just depends on the level of interaction that child is having with what they're seeing on the screen. But in terms of the light exposure that affects their sleep, any screen that shows them blue light is unfortunately damaging to their sleep. So that's the difference. There's two things that screen time does to children's development. One of them is just blunts their social interactions, but the other one affects their sleep. So no matter what screen you're looking at, if it's past dusk, it's not good for their sleep. Okay. Do you recommend melatonin for young kids, Dr. Monegro?
Well, it depends on the circumstance. So if there is a circadian problem where the child has a circadian disorder, where they're falling asleep too late and waking up too late, and you just want to adjust that internal clock, then melatonin definitely has a role to play. And as you all may know, melatonin is naturally released by our pineal gland. So we make melatonin. The purpose of using melatonin in a child is to shift that internal clock. It's what we call a phase shift. And typically, it can be given anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours prior to their goal bedtime. What you set as a goal bedtime is also important, because if they're going to bed at 5 in the morning every day, you can give them melatonin at 4 in the morning. It's not going to, make a difference. Or you're giving melatonin at 5 in the afternoon, it's not going to make a difference. So that's where we come into our clinic and kind of provide some guidance as to when to do melatonin. Now, if you are to do and give melatonin, typically lower doses are better.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the evidence lies. If you're giving 10 milligrams of melatonin to your child, it's not making any impact in helping with their internal clock. Doses of 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams are just appropriate, or even less. You do not need to do mega doses of melatonin.
And they will never work in keeping your child asleep. Melatonin is very short acting. And so if your child's problem is waking up multiple times per night, no matter how much you give them before bedtime, it will not keep them asleep. And so you don't want to escalate that dose and for that purpose. It just won't work. And you don't want to have them be groggy in the morning.
It doesn't put them to sleep. I just want to make that clear. Melatonin is what we call darkness in a pill. Just tells your brain it's dark outside. But the moment you start looking at the screen, you could give the child all the melatonin you want. It's not going to make a single difference. In fact, your own melatonin that you release, and this has been studied, when you look at the levels throughout the night, the moment you look at your phone or have any screen time, the levels drop rapidly. So there is no amount of melatonin that can fix screen time.
Okay, so let's move on to our QA since it's after 2 o'clock. Anybody who has to leave us because of time, we understand, but we'll stay on and finish the rest of the questions if that's okay with you, Dr. Monegro. There's just a few left in the Q&A box. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, so do you recommend following, oops, somehow I got goofed up here. Sun up, sundown schedules, or going to bed earlier in the winter and staying up later in the summer? What do you think, Dr. Monegro?
And see that question, but
it's in the Q&A box.
Okay.
That's actually part of the reason that a lot of people in colder climates like Buffalo have issues with depression and low energy during the winter is because we don't actually get enough sunshine. The best thing to do is actually increase bright light exposure as opposed to changing your sleep schedule. That's actually better for you in the winter. And so they actually prescribe light therapy for people with seasonal affective disorder because of that, which is actually interesting. So instead of changing your sleep patterns, we should try to give ourselves more bright light. That would be better for you in the winter than sleeping more. Do you agree with that, Dr. Monegro?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how does one get back on a normal sleep schedule upon return from vacation? What do you think?
Well, assuming you are you starting school the next day? But I think what we have found is actually depending on your vacation, you may actually end up coming back with a better sleep routine. In fact, when you go camping, you actually improve your sleep schedule because you are in the outdoors and you're really relying on sunlight, sundown to resynchronize your internal clock, your circadian rhythm. So sometimes going on vacation, especially camping trips, can really make a big benefit. And also it's harder to find signal and be on your phone and tablets during that time. So camping.
If you are staying up late and you want to enjoy your vacation, it might be a good idea that night on vacation before you come home, trying to get closer to your nighttime routine at home so that it's not such an abrupt transition when you come back. You know, a lot of people say they needed a week off after their vacation to get ready for going back to work. That's because partially of how disrupted your sleep is. It really affects your ability to function day to day. So that's one of those things you have to just weigh the risk benefit of it. And if you want to enjoy every minute of your vacation, you do that, but just be aware that the next day might be very difficult to get to school on time.
Yes, and just remember that we function better in a routine. So even when you're on vacation, just because you're on vacation doesn't necessarily mean you have to pull all-nighters, If you're on vacation, you have all day to, watch a movie, to exercise, to eat. And so vacation does not mean necessarily that you have to be awake, until 2 a.m. every day,
Okay, next question. My son is 11, and since the pandemic, he's asking me to sleep with him. I believe he's feeling some anxiety with all the changes. I believe we touched on this topic just a little bit already. Just in general, that's a very normal reaction. And you can see that in our survey that a lot of children were asking to co-sleep. And I think the internal drive as a parent is to want to protect them. And so I can honestly understand that instinct. but it is important to use this opportunity to teach your son and ourselves to self-soothe and to try to get through this on their own, because he will go through other crises in his life. He will have times when he's older where he'll be afraid or anxious, and he's going to have to figure out how to fall asleep on his own then as well. So use this as an opportunity to try to help him become more independent when it comes to that part of his anxiety. And some of those tricks are, like I mentioned earlier, be in their room when he goes to bed, be there with him, but not necessarily in the bed with him. And then every night get further and further away. So he knows you're there. He knows you're there. He's supporting him. He's safe, but he doesn't need physical contact with you, and he doesn't need to be in your bed with you to have that reassurance and that safety.
I
Yeah,
completely
Dr.
agree.
Monegro. Yeah.
I completely agree. I think that, life, and especially with this pandemic, there's been a lot of stress and it's impacted children in many ways. But if they want your physical presence, um, try to avoid it being in your bedroom, because once you develop that habit, it's very difficult to change it. And at that age, you may be able to have a conversation about what is worrying your child, and find out also what are all the things that they find relaxing. It's actually a very good exercise. It takes some thought in doing, but you sit down and you ask, well, what do you enjoy doing? What do you like listening to? What do you enjoy playing? What foods do you like? What do you find reassuring? And you come up with this very long list. What toys do you like? Um, what games do you like? What's your favorite video game? What's your favorite show? And you come up with this long list of all the activities that your child likes. And that might provide a segue to choose some activity or something that is reassuring and relaxing to your child. There was one patient that found that their dog was that reassurance. Just knowing that their dog was there to protect her was in some ways reassuring. But you won't get to that point until you really explore their fear, and also all the positive things that they love.
Okay, tips for daylight savings. There's a couple questions about what we should do for daylight savings. There's no easy answer for that. We all know as sleep doctors, daylight savings is very disruptive to our bodies, and that's why heart attacks go up and suicides go up on the weekends of those daylight savings times. So the best way is actually to get prepared the week before. And either move up or move back your bedtime by about 15 minutes for the first few days, just to get that 1 hour adjusted. That's the best way to prepare for daylight savings. If you can't do that because it's work and it's a Saturday into a Sunday night, then maybe just doing that adjustment on Friday night to get ready for Saturday would work well. But there aren't any easy cure-alls for daylight savings, and there is a large push, I think, in the European sleep community against any type of quick adjustments in the clock, like the ones that we have in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other thoughts on that, Dr. Monegro? I don't think.
I agree with that, and when to add to another dimension to that question, school start times is also an issue. You know, uh, we know that the American Academy of Pediatrics even recommends that school starts at 8:30, and most of, like, 90% of high schoolers don't achieve that, and over 50% of middle schoolers schools as well don't achieve that, more than that. So would things get better if kids were allowed to start school later? It might. It probably will.
Will there be a session like this offered for older kids over 13? If there's an interest, I think Dr. Monegro and I would be happy to do that. We're always willing to give tips and try to help our children of Western New York. So if so, let us know. We'd be happy to do that. Next questions. What are your recommendations for a child who has sports practice for multiple hours? Yeah, this is a major issue. Until 8:30 p.m., we tend to provide a light refueling snack when they're home before bed. Now we've broken two sleep rules with activity and food. Are we wrong in thinking refueling is important at that part of the evening? This is a major problem with high schoolers in the United States. Extracurriculars go too late, especially physical activities, and then they have homework on top of that afterwards, which is almost predominantly on computers and on screens. And it really does lead to a delay in sleep onset, and yet they still have to wake up very early to get to school in the morning. It's one of the primary drivers for inadequate sleep in teenagers, and it's a major problem. So to be honest with you, um, it's an issue. You have to weigh the risk and benefits of doing sports. Physical activity is very important to children to be healthy and happy, and not just from the actual exercise, but from being around other children and the social interactions. That's really good for children, especially teenagers. So I wouldn't tell them to stop the sports. I would just obviously say that anything that they need to eat afterwards would be a very, very light snack, if anything at all. They could probably eat on the ride home, but not when you get home. As soon as he gets home, shower, get into a quiet and cold environment with not a lot of stimulation, and sort of use the other cues to tell them that it's ready, it's time for bed.
Yeah, that there is no easy solution to that. Um, so it would be um, we should not expect our kids to come home after a practice and be ready for sleep, because that just it wouldn't be realistic. So either they'll sleep later and find a way to wake up later, or you really have to sit down and figure out how to adjust the schedule.
Mhm.
Sometimes parents put kids in multiple extracurricular activities all within the same day, and sometimes that can be too much. So you'll have to sit down with your child and figure out what's important. Maybe they can change some of their morning classes. Some schools allow that, so that they have flexibility.
What are a few things parents can do to improve their sleep too, as they help model good sleep hygiene for their kids? Are there any things that may help adults that don't help kids, or vice versa? No, all the rules that we applied, Emily, to children work for adults as well. And I think that we're actually one of the primary reasons that children learn to sleep badly. In general, and I just say this anecdotally, when we watch children in the sleep lab, we'll see the parent on the phone until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I think we need to be mindful. And in the AAP guidelines about screen time, they actually had a section that mentioned that when parents are on their phones all the time, children see that and they want to be on the phones as well. So I think being mindful of how often we have our phone at our bedside, we are looking at our phones, or we have our phones around our children, could be the most singularly impactful change that a parent can make on their own sleep as well as their children's sleep.
There are homes that literally will have a TV on in every room, and there will never be a time in the whole day, 24-hour period, where the TV will be off.
Mhm.
That's not uncommon in our clinic, and it creates major challenges. The child could leave the room and watch TV outside. It's also difficult, particularly with a teenager, to convince them that removing the TV is important when you have one also in your room. So I think, as hard as it is to hear it, we have to model good sleep hygiene. Now, we don't need to be going to bed at the same time that they do, depending on their age, but we do need to model better sleep habits.
Yeah, and that does include screens, but also it includes, not making a lot of noise or playing loud music when we sleep. I think that there's a lot we could do that would make the environment quiet and less stimulating for children when they are supposed to be asleep. I think just being aware that children should be going to bed before you is very important. Okay, we have only 3 more questions. We're almost there. I'm sorry if I already mentioned this, but is there a suggested amount of time before bed that screens should be off? Yes. For everyone, it should be 1 to 2 hours before your goal bedtime. That should be about the time that you get them to bed. Oh, this one's another about handle daylight savings. So I think we answered that one. And the last question, okay, this one's easy. Are the charts from this presentation available somewhere? Yes, the entire presentation, including all the pictures and the slides, will be available online after 4 o'clock today. Megan Veers will post it on several of our UBMD sleep websites. If you just Google that, you should be able to find the webinar. And Megan, will you send out an email with how to get to the link so that people can see the recording from today?
Yes, everyone will receive an email, even those who had to leave early or those who could not make today's webinar. They'll receive an email with the link included of how to access it.
Okay.
Wonderful.
I think that's it for all the questions that I can find. I hope if I missed your question, I apologize. But thank you so much for all coming, and I hope that you learned something about how to get back into school during this trying time. And if you have a question for us, please email. That email is for our entire sleep center, so we'd be happy to help and be there for you. Okay?
Thank you all, and I hope you also found this beneficial and that your kids have a good start of the school year.
Everybody stay happy and healthy, okay?
Bye.
Very much.